cheap.
Are you worried about the war cabinet being disbanded?
Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
The media is asking Biden questions. What did he yell at them?
We need to hear that again.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
We've got to hear that again. Listen.
Ceasefire deal. Are you worried about the war cabinet? Are you worried about the war cabinet?
It's a cheap fake.
Wow.
I mean, really, the correct word is deep fake. But Karine Jean-Pierre also thinks that it's the Nord Stream, it's the Nordstrom pipeline. Just get all those sales right to your house, guys. Welcome back to the program. Top of the second hour. Dana Loesch here with you. That was I guess it was another cheap fake, right? Any video that they don't like is a cheap fake. I don't even know what that means, but okay. All right. It's not, though. We still don't know what he said.
He was trying to mock the yelling press, and it was just incoherent mockery. And there it is. It's our president.
But don't ask questions that are too hard to answer because it's going to make KJP upset. Audio soundbite 2. She gets very upset when you ask her about stuff like the video that we just watched, or I don't know, like the stuff that was the Normandy ceremony or the G7 thing. I mean, she gets they're not handling this well. Listen.
There were 2 instances in recent days where leaders, former President Obama and Georgia Maloney of Italy, they physically put hands on the president to guide him and show him, give stage directions. Are they doing that on their own, or has anybody asked them to run the show like that?
First of all, let me spoke to the most recent, right? And as we saw on Saturday, President Obama's office put out a statement. So I would refer you to that statement about what was being accused in those by others. And he said this did not happen in the sense of what people were saying they were seeing, right? Or what was being falsely reported that they were seeing. Let's not forget, President Obama, President Biden have a relationship. They are friends. They're like family to each other. And I think that's what you saw. You saw the president put his hand on the back of President Biden, and they walked off the stage after taking questions or at an event taking questions from Jimmy Kimmel. That is what
she's not taking this well. She's not taking this well at all. She seems upset. Well, it's not. It can't. It's just no. He's just. He's not declined. You can't explain it. It just looks bad. It looks bad, and this is one of the things we're talking about, and that Democrats are making it look worse by not addressing it. Because if you're telling us that we're the problem because of what we're seeing, then you're not helping your candidate. I got to tell you. Speaking of helping the candidate, so if you get the newsletter over at Substack, my Substack column, Chapter and Verse, I had a couple of things that went out, and one of those I want to expand on. It's the VP stakes. Because, there's a short list floating around of Trump's VP potentials. And I think that maybe more so now than ever, this is probably one of the most consequential VP selections of any election that I can remember. I don't think it mattered as much with McCain, and I don't honestly even think it really mattered much with Trump in 2016. I think everybody can agree with that. I don't think it really mattered all that much. I think Pence locked up the evangelical and the more traditional GOP voters. But in this, I think that Trump needs to build on what he's got and maximize gains. But at the same time, he's got some room here. He has a lot of options, actually. The Republicans have a really huge bench, whereas Democrats have, I got to count, maybe Buttigieg, maybe Newsom. That's like it. Brig Gretsch. I mean, we talked about that yesterday. We don't really know who they have. So the short list keeps shrinking. So originally it included a lot of other people. I think right now the 4 names that keep getting mentioned the most are Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, Rubio out of Florida, Tim Scott, senator out of South Carolina, and J.D. Vance, senator out of Ohio. And I feel like Vance has been leading a lot of these not totally scientific grassroots voter surveys or grassroots surveys. And now, keep in mind, I think I've only met Tim Scott in person. No, I think I've met Marco Rubio once. I've met Tim Scott, but I don't have anything personal against these guys, but I'm going to be very clinical in the way that I look at this. I don't like the idea of a J.D. Vance as VP, and here's why. As I discussed in the piece, when you look at the current Senate makeup, It's 51-49. And Republicans are, and there's 4 independents, but they caucus with Democrats. So even when you look at the seats in play, it is going to be a fight to even scrape up some nominal majority. And even then, it's not guaranteed. It is a fight because in some of these areas, you have to consider redistricting. Now, when Vance won against Democrat Tim Ryan, it was by just barely 7 points. Now, Trump is leading Biden in Ohio, but it's within the margin of error. I would have felt better with a Vance selection if Trump were polling double digits ahead of Biden in Ohio. Now, I know that DeWine is going to replace Vance, but there's going to be an election then not long after that. I'm trying to keep all of this in gear. And plus, I think, can I be honest? I think DeWine is a little bit of a moderate. So I tend to think that whoever he selects would be more moderate than Vance on certain issues. So that's another reason why. It's not because I dislike Vance. I just think that he better serves the overall agenda in the Senate right now. And that's, specifically just for the math alone is why I'm looking at it the way I'm looking at it. His area is not like Tim Scott's South Carolina district, because in 2022, Scott just absolutely destroyed his Democrat challenger by plus 25, by over 25 points. So again, I know that DeWine would pick Vance's replacement, but DeWine's moderate. And I don't think that you're going to get somebody who is as conservative as what you have there picked by DeWine. Now, I don't know that even picking Vance is enough to lock in Ohio either, because he doesn't have that national name recognition. And I think that Republican voters, from looking at some of the breakdown, they're very interested in Ohio. So I don't know if it's guaranteed. But I do think this, and because I've already seen this floating around, and I'm just telling you this because you're going to need to know it. If Vance is picked, you can count on Democrats making ad after ad of the time that Vance called Trump America's Hitler. He did. It's out there. And he wrote op-eds like Opioid of the Masses, how Trump can't fix America's social and cultural crisis. They're going to start circulating that, and they're going to put it out there, and they're going to say, oh, look, MAGA, you prioritize loyalty more than anything else. Well, here's this guy. He wasn't loyal. So, and then they're going to exploit that and try to hold it against you. I'm just saying, regardless of whether or not and why Vance changes thinking, that's going to be a tool to use. You need to be aware of this. And the left is preparing for this outcome because I've already seen it circulating. As for Marco Rubio, I could never, in good conscience, pick a Rubio for VP because I watched him crumble on stage in front of me at Parkland. He went up before me, and I stood there and I watched him completely crumble on an assault weapons ban. I watched him completely crumble on a national registry, aka universal background checks, and I watched him completely crumble on red flag laws. He just fell apart. He went along to get along, and that is a deal breaker for me. Because of that, I could never, ever back him as a VP. And plus, he's from Florida. Now, I'm not saying because I dislike Floridians. I love Floridians. I love Florida. Florida is not going anywhere but red. And it's not illegal to have the Constitution, the 12th Amendment doesn't prohibit, we talked about this yesterday, two people from the same state running. There is regulations on how the electoral college votes or how those voters vote. But it doesn't leverage voters nationally well enough. And I just think that I just don't think that it's a good idea to do that. Judging also by the zealous registration of GOP voters over Democrats and the recent elections that Florida has seen, they have such a massive red wave. I mean, their state legislature has a super majority. They're red. They are red. There's nothing to be gained from running two red state dudes on the same ticket. Nothing. You have to leverage this. Doug Burgum out of South Dakota is, North Dakota, I was right, is just a moderate non-entity. He's a moderate non-entity. Tom Cotton's name has been mentioned before. He comes from a solid red state. I think him as a VP leverages absolutely nothing for the ticket. And furthermore, some of what he wants to do foreign policy-wise is completely at odds with Trump's agenda. Cotton wants to spend. He is one of the Republicans that wants to spend on Ukraine. That's not where Trump is. I've seen Elise Stefanik mentioned before, but I think her name has kind of fallen off the subsequent list. She's a moderate Republican with a moderate record. And she was not always on board with Trump. She said one time verbatim in a radio interview that, quote, Trump was insulting to women. Now, I mentioned this last month because she was doing an interview with Shannon Bream, and Shannon Bream asked her about it because it was mentioned in a New York Times piece. And Stefanik got really angry with Bream and accused Bream of citing some anonymous report in the New York Times, even though it was a literal, for real interview that Stefanik willingly gave to a local radio station that the New York Times merely cited. And Stefanik was employing the guilt by association tactic in order to dodge answering why she changed her thinking about that, which would have been an amazing opportunity to potentially persuade undecided voters. And I think that was the finessing of a situation that required more advanced rhetorical artistry than she possesses. And that to me, I was like, I don't think that's a good, nah. The Republican Party, I think, also has to look to more than just November because they have to look 8 years ahead, right? So whoever Trump picks for VP, that ticket's got to have longevity. Now, I think that the biggest gains, because my short list for VP, for his VP is very, very short, and it only includes governors. Kemp, Youngkin. I like DeSantis, but again, same argument that I made with Rubio. Two people from a red state, not going to leverage anything to win. I don't think that it works. But I think that Brian Kemp or Glenn Youngkin would get the biggest gains, even though I know he doesn't get along with Brian Kemp. Get over it for the agenda. Because both of those states are in play. A lot of people think that Georgia is, a solid red state, and it's not a solid red state necessarily. Now, here's what's interesting, and this is where I want to segue into toss-up. Virginia has been moved to a toss-up category. Glenn Youngkin, gets one term. He terms out in about a year. He's potentially a more practical choice than a Brian Kemp because Virginia is in play and it is considered a toss-up state. I also think that Youngkin would also bring in more traditionally non-Trump Republican voters, uniting the right-leaning fray, so to speak. And so I also think that Youngkin isn't super charismatic. No, I'm not saying this is to be mean to him. He's kind of nerdy. He's not super charismatic, which I think better suits Trump's style because you cannot have two super strong personalities on the same ticket. That's a disaster. You can't do that. Somebody's got to be Johnny Carson. Somebody's got to be Ed McMahon. You can't have two Johnny Carsons and you can't have two Ed McMahons. It doesn't work that way. Somebody's got to play. You got to play the right role. So the good news is that I think the Republican bench is super overcrowded. And that's good for us, right? Because you got a lot of presidential hopefuls. That means a lot of good choices for voters. And especially when you compare it to what Democrats have. What are they going to do? Seriously, what do they do after 24, guys? Who do they got? Nobody. Can you imagine them in 28? Oh my gosh.